Last spring, someone cleaned out their late father's garage and donated a dusty tackle box to a Goodwill in the Midwest. A collector walked in, paid $6 for it, and walked out. 2 days later, he flipped the contents of that box for $3,400. He didn't repair a thing. He didn't even clean them. The reels inside looked like junk, corroded, outdated, stamped with names nobody at that store recognized. And here is the part that should bother you. That wasn't luck, and it wasn't a one-off. The fishing reels worth real money in 2026 were built to look exactly like the ones people throw in the trash. And the wrong people keep finding that out too late, usually about a week after the estate sale is already over. That same story plays out every weekend in this country. A box of old junk reels sells for $10 on a Saturday morning. By Monday, one of them is listed at a tackle auction for the price of a used car payment. It happens so reliably that there's an entire quiet industry built on it. People who do nothing but show up early, buy cheap, and resell to collectors who already know the codes. Welcome to American Fishing, the channel that hands you the part of the market the resellers already trade on for free. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell, because the real question isn't whether these reels are worth money. They are. The question is why they keep getting priced at nothing, right? And exactly who profits every single time they do. Most people who find an old reel run the same 3 filters in their head. Does it still work? Is it a brand I recognize? Does it look clean and complete? Those 3 filters feel completely reasonable. They are also almost perfectly exactly backwards. That spotless reel you'd grab first, it might be a mid-90s mass production model worth about $12 at a swap meet. That corroded one with the faded stamp and the cracked handle knob, it might be the exact reel a serious collector has been hunting on eBay for the last 18 months. So condition matters, but not the way you think. Brand matters, but not the way the shelf suggests. What actually drives the value of a vintage reel is a completely different question. And it starts with a manufacturing window most casual sellers have never even heard of. Quick one, before we get into it, comment below if you've got any old reels tucked away at home. Tell me the brand and roughly how old, and I'll tell you if it's a sleeper. Between the late 1940s and the early 1970s, a handful of American and Japanese makers were building reels to a standard that simply hasn't been matched since. At the same price point, small production runs, high-tolerance machining done by people who could lose their job over a bad batch, all-metal construction, and real country of origin accountability. This is the era when a reel was a tool you handed to your grandson, not a product you replaced every 2 seasons. When Abu Garcia still built its Ambassadors in Sangsta, Sweden, the tolerances were tight enough that those reels still run glass smooth 50 years later. When Pfluger was still genuinely American, when Mitchell was still made in France, when Penn was still machining certain Senators with specific materials and a specific internal geometry. Back then, the country stamped on the foot of a reel actually meant something. Made in Sweden, made in France, made in the USA. That wasn't marketing. It was a promise about the metal, the machining, and the people who signed off on it. A reel from that era wasn't designed with a planned lifespan. It was designed to outlive the angler who bought it. That single difference in intent is most of what a collector is really paying for. Those reels were built to a different logic than almost everything that came after them. And then quietly, that logic got bought out. Then came the acquisitions, the consolidations, the private equity math run by people who had never held a reel in cold water in their lives. The same brand name stayed right there on the packaging, but the manufacturing logic underneath it changed completely. Abu Garcia today is owned by Pure Fishing, which is itself part of a much larger holding structure that also controls Berkeley, Shakespeare, Fenwick, and a long list of other names. Together, those names quietly dominate the entire mid-market shelf. You think you're choosing between competitors, often you're choosing between cousins. And collectors know these cutoff dates the way a wine buyer knows a bad vintage year. They can tell you the exact year a brand's quality fell off a cliff. Casual sellers, meanwhile, have no idea the conversation is even happening. And that gap between what the seller knows and what the buyer knows is the entire engine of this market. And understand, this is not nostalgia. Nobody is paying $4,000 for an old reel because it makes them feel warm about the 1960s. They're paying because that specific object from that specific window made in that specific factory, genuinely cannot be reproduced today at any price. Scarcity plus quality plus a story the market can verify. Subscribe if you want the side of the vintage tackle market the resellers already live in, because that information gap isn't an accident, it's structural, and it's profitable on purpose. So here are the 10 reels that keep showing up wildly undervalued, and for each one, the exact tell that insiders look for and almost every casual seller misses. Now, the complete version of this list, every brand's exact cutoff year, the model-by-model tells, and the auction houses that actually pay collector money, already lives inside the Angler's Vault. Tap the first link in the description or scan the QR code in the corner. But stay right here, because the single most expensive mistake on this entire list comes near the end, and it's the one almost everyone makes. Number one, and the single one that comes up most often, the Abu Garcia Ambassador 5000. The version that matters is pre-1975 Swedish manufacture, and there is one detail that separates an $800 reel from a $40 one. Look for Made in Sweden stamped right on the foot, and then count the screws on the side plate. 5 screws, not 4. That's the collector's tell. Post-acquisition versions drop to 4. Think about how small that detail is. 1 screw on a reel that, to 99 people out of 100, looks completely identical either way. That is exactly why this works. The value isn't hidden in something obvious like rust or a missing handle. It's hidden in the kind of detail you only look for if someone already told you it mattered. Number 2, the Garcia Mitchell 300, made in France before Garcia absorbed the brand in the early 70s. French-made Mitchells have a harder anodization on the spool and a very specific casting quality on the bail wire. Collectors go straight for the bail. A rough or thin bail is a production flag, but a clean, heavy bail on a French-marked reel can push the price past $600 on a slow week. Number 3, the Penn Senator series. Pre-1980 variants, especially the 113H and 114H, with their original star drag and non-chromed metal side covers, are the ones that move. Here's the counterintuitive part. A Senator that's been chrome polished or had its star drag swapped out is worth a fraction of an all-original one. Even one in noticeably worse shape. That feels wrong to a normal seller who assumes shinier means more money. But to a collector, original parts are the whole point. That's the market, whether it's intuitive or not. Number 4, the Pfluger Supreme. In the models built before the 1960s, it's a level wind baitcaster with an anti-reverse mechanism collectors consider functionally better than anything at its original price. The model number is stamped on the foot, and sellers who photograph the reel without ever flipping it over to show that stamp are leaving the identification and the price sitting right on the table. Number 5, the Zebco 33, but only in its earliest form. The 1950s standard model with a brass cone and a specific internal gear configuration is genuinely collectible. Every later version, and that's most of what fills those garage sale boxes labeled Vintage Zebco, is not. The rule is simple. Brass cone, look closer, plastic face, later production, move on. Number 6, Hardy Brothers fly reels from England. The Perfect, the Uniqua, and the Marquee lines from before 1980 sit in a category entirely of their own. Hardy is one of the rare brands where the name still genuinely correlates with quality, but the specific model and the production era still decide everything. Collectors on the Orca forums constantly report non-collectors selling these for $20 to $40 at estate sales, because the reel just looks small and old. Realized prices on correct examples start around $400, and boxed ones with the original paperwork run well past $1,000. Number 7, Finn Norr reels from the Wedding Cake spool era, roughly pre-1970. This one may have the single highest ceiling on the entire list. These are big saltwater reels with a distinctive layered spool that took machining time no modern production schedule would ever allow. Documented sales at specialty tackle auctions have cleared $5,000 for correct examples. They're rare at estate sales, but when they show up, they are almost never identified correctly. A reel like that gets tossed into a $15 lot precisely because it looks like an oversized, outdated chunk of metal. Its rarity is invisible to anyone who doesn't already collect them. Number 8, Old Kentucky Baitcasters. Names like Meek, Milam and Talbot, and the related pre-industrial American makers. These weren't mass-market reels. They were built by hand, in tiny numbers, where provenance and mechanical originality decide almost the entire value. When one turns up in a tackle box, it's almost always priced as old junk. Verified examples with original hardware have sold past $4,000 at tackle auctions. And rounding out the 10, older Headon, Ocean City, and South Bend casting reels. Pre-war and immediate post-war models, all metal, with the original finish still intact. These are mid-tier collectibles, usually $80 to $400, but they are dramatically underpriced at most estate sales for the simplest reason of all. Nobody behind the table recognizes them as collectible in the first place. Now, here is where most sellers lose the most money of all, and it is not in picking the wrong reel. It's in what they do to the right one before they sell it. The instinct is universal. You find an old reel and you want to help it. Clean it up, polish the metal, oil the gears, make it look presentable for the photos. That instinct quietly destroys the premium, because collectors are not buying a reel to go fishing with. They are buying a documented object. The original patina on the side plate is information. The unpolished finish is the evidence that the reel is authentic and untouched. Strip that off and you've erased the very thing they pay for. And one product specifically is a documented problem in the collector forums, WD-40. It damages certain older seals and surface coatings in ways that can't be reversed and that an experienced buyer can spot under close inspection. You think you're helping, you're leaving a fingerprint. The same reel in worse visual shape, but with its original surface untouched, can sell for 3 times as much as the polished one sitting right next to it. And one more thing most people throw away without a thought. Original packaging and paperwork can double the realized price all on its own. Most sellers never even think to look for the box. It's usually on the closet shelf above where the reel was stored, gathering the same dust for 40 years. So how do the people who actually know how to do this play it? It starts with where they don't go. They don't post old fishing reel, works great on Facebook Marketplace. They don't drop it at a consignment shop and take whatever the counter offers. Instead, they photograph the model stamp, the country of origin mark, the side plate screw count, the spool material, and the foot condition. Then, and this is the key, they ask before they price. And where you ask matters just as much as what you ask. The same reel, described correctly in the right venue, finds the right buyer at the real price. The same reel listed as old fishing reel, works great on a Saturday night marketplace, finds exactly one kind of person. The picker, who already knows what you don't, post it instead in an Orca forum or a Lang's pre-auction identification thread with clear photos of the stamp and the side plate. Those are the rooms where vintage reels are actually understood. And here is the single most valuable search you can run. Look up the exact model on eBay's completed listings. And filter by sold, not active, because active listings are only what sellers are hoping to get. Sold listings are what a real buyer actually paid. And very often, those two numbers are nowhere near each other. If you're still unsure, post your photos in an Orca forum or a dedicated vintage tackle group before you do anything. Ask what production run it represents. A real collector answers that question in minutes. A picker who wants to buy it cheap will tell you it's hard to say, probably not the valuable one, but they could take it off your hands. Learn to hear the difference. And one last warning that costs people the most. Do not sell pre-1970 American or Japanese reels in bulk. Do not let an estate company price a whole mixed box as a single lot. Separate them, photograph every single one, and ask first. Here's the uncomfortable truth about that mispricing. The informed buyers aren't waiting around for the general public to catch up and bid them up. They're at the estate sale on the first morning. They're sorting through the boxes while the price tags are still being written in pencil. They want the public to stay confused. The mispricing isn't a market failure they're hoping somebody fixes. It is the exact condition the entire arbitrage depends on. Every confused seller is a payday, because the reel in that tackle box didn't lose its value the day it stopped being used. It lost its value the moment it left the hands of someone who knew what it was and landed in the hands of someone who didn't. That gap, the whole reason this market exists, closes the second you learn to ask the right question. And the people quietly profiting from that gap, the ones at the estate sale on the first morning while the price tags are still being written, they're counting on you never asking at all. The full vintage tackle identification guide, The brand cutoff dates, the model by model tells, and the auction houses that actually pay collector prices is all in the Angler's Vault. Now scan the QR code in the corner right now or tap the first link in the description. Every subscription keeps this kind of knowledge in the open instead of locked inside the resale trade. So before you donate that box, before you price it, before you let anyone talk you into a quick lot, flip the reel over, find the stamp, and ask what it really is. Subscribe, hit the bell, and send this to the one person you know with a garage full of their father's old tackle. Next week, we open the vault a little wider. Now, go check that garage.